when we do that, which is something that's imprinted in us, people can't help but do that. So even if someone doesn't have respect for God or His Word, they will still have a sex drive. You just can't get away from it.
They can still make babies.
Again, something miraculous happened with my partner in our law firm. I remember tapping me on the shoulder and saying, well, God said to him that he's going to enter the courtroom now. And so we were pretty much, looking out for a rushing wind, the judge being blown off his chair or something like that. But at the same time, our advocate was sitting on the other side of me, and he started paging through the authorities bundle. So, all the legislation, court cases, looking for that silver bullet, that everybody says doesn't exist.
Okay.
But on that day, we found out it does exist.
And you're a father of 2 girls. I mean, you must think of their future as well.
I've played that movie out a little bit in my head. Maybe you're at the same place, but if it comes down to it, and the question is, are you okay with your grade 1 daughter sharing a bathroom with a grade 12 boy? There's no lengths that I would not be willing to go to have that fight.
Yes,
we will have that fight, and I won't lose that fight. In the academic space, if it's not there with the express purpose to glorify God in what we're doing, you can only go one other way. The whole gender revolution has been quite destructive, and a lot of it has been played out in the US and other developed Western countries, where we see women being basically demanded that they give up their private spaces.
And there are court cases about it. I mean, there had to be a court case recently to say what a woman is.
Exactly.
What world are we living in? I was looking at that thinking, in other news, water is wet.
Gender has been detached from sex completely. In other words, whatever you do and your preference, that is what you are. And the world has to accept that. It doesn't matter what your biology says. It only matters how you self-identify and how you express that.
So feelings, lived experience, trumps biology.
That is the claim.
Rayan Smith, welcome to the In HeinzSight BoldCast, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Heinz. It's a pleasure to be with you.
I feel like this has been coming a long time. We have connected in many ways, and we share, I think, a lot of passions. And so this is great to have this conversation. Thanks for coming in today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
You are a busy man. You are busy with many important things, and we're going to talk about that today. But I'd like to first get to know you a bit better, and for those who are listening to also get to know you a bit better. Yeah. We do share a few things, like we both studied at Stellenbosch. The only difference is you finished law studies and you went on to actually be a lawyer. I did not. I did singing. but so you went to study law at Stellenbosch University. Let's just start with the why. Why did you have an interest in law in the first place?
Yeah, so a very interesting story from my side. I come from a family of lawyers, so I don't know how far it goes back, but the first relationship I had with a lawyer was my grandfather.
Okay.
On my father's side. And so then his son, my uncle, my father's brother, he's also an attorney. And then so one of his sons is also an attorney, my one cousin. But
that's a lot of attorneys.
That's true. But in my case, we also have some, cousins of my father, on both sides, his mom's side, my grandmother's side, and so on.
Okay.
But for me, I actually only wanted to go study BCom. And so when I was in the queue to register on the day that the first years register, I got this. I don't know if it was the Lord. In hindsight, it probably was the Lord. But
in hindsight.
You got me there. That was unplanned.
Thank you for the free plug for the show.
Come on. But so in the queue, I felt this need, to study law. And so literally when the lady I sat next to, and are we talking about the previous millennium now? 1999.
It's been a while.
Then she asked me, so is this right? You want to go study BCom? And I said, no, can you change it to BCom law?
Wow, like right there.
In the moment.
I didn't even know that's possible.
It was.
Okay.
But, so that's where the journey started. Literally on a day, nobody knew about it. Parents didn't know about it. friends, nobody.
But was your lawyer family happy when you made that decision?
I can't remember. That's too long ago. But looking back on how things panned out, I suppose. So,
all right. So it was the knee jerk at first to do BCom a thing of like, I want to do business, I want to know more about business, because was it like a pursuit of something, or is it more like, I don't want to be like the others in my family?
I think it was more a case of I didn't really know what to do.
Okay.
And went through all of these aptitude tests and things that you go through in your grade 11 and 12 years.
Yeah.
And basically everybody said to me, you can go anything. What do you like? And, you know, what does a 17-year-old person know about what they like?
That's the shotgun approach. Just, you know, whatever. Oh, my word.
So I just went for something, which was at that stage made the most sense, kind of a default, BCom.
Okay.
But then, obviously, the Lord was at work as well.
Yeah.
So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
So speaking of the Lord, what is your story of meeting Him, becoming a Christian? When did that happen?
Yeah. So I grew up in a family that was church going.
Okay.
And believers in our family, my parents and others in our family.
All right.
Grew up in the Dutch Reformed Church, and I, you know, have a lot to be thankful for that upbringing, a real, you know, respect for God, a reverence for God, you know, a seriousness about the authority of Scripture in your life and all of those things. But I think it was about age 7 or 8 when I was really gripped by fear a lot. And at the time, you know, the one thing that I knew is that, you know, if you submit your life to God, if you become His child, He will look after you. And so that was really the thing that, in a sense, drove me. But then, of course, the Lord is always drawing at the same time.
What was that fear, do you think, that you experienced? A fear of what?
Difficult to say. But what I do remember is at nighttime, I would feel really fearful.
All right.
You know, I think it's a normal thing for young kids that, you know, in the dark, you can't see, you know, your parents, and, you know, you're a little bit less sure about, you know, many things. You feel a little bit exposed to whatever it was.
How old were you at the time?
About 6, 7.
That's quite young.
That age, yeah.
Yeah, to have a first encounter with God,
yes.
You know, that's quite a young age.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so I gave my life to God, and then from then on, as we all know, that you know, the experience of praying and reading the Bible was completely different because, you know, it's a moment where you're speaking to someone. You're not just saying words, and God starts speaking back, of course. So that was good.
Did you experience God speaking back to you at a young age?
I think my challenge generally in life is that I can't remember very well my years as a young child.
Okay.
But the recollections that I do have of my relationship with the Lord is from an early age, that, you know, He was, you know, speaking to me in many different ways.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So,
wow.
Yeah.
What a privilege. That's truly awesome. I remember my first real encounter with Him as being very real.
Yes.
Was a bit later. I was about 12. I was invited to a birthday party. The idea was to watch a movie.
Okay.
And the plan was to watch some animation movie that was in back then. I can't remember exactly what it was now.
Yeah.
But when we got there, the mom whose boy was having a birthday didn't plan ahead. So she didn't buy tickets ahead of time. So when we got there, it was sold out. So in her panic, she, in her wisdom, had to choose between Pretty Women and Fright Night, a horror movie of vampires. And she decided that I can't let 12-year-olds watch, you know, the sex movie of a prostitute, so let's take them to the vampire movie.
Oh my.
Bro, I couldn't sleep for a month. I was so... It stole all my innocence. It was horrific. My mom almost killed that woman. I couldn't believe what was done. In a moment of like, you know, being really unwise. I'm sure she had her reasons, but it really affected me negatively. And I had to, you know, to get over the fear. I mean, you're talking about fear.
Yeah.
That was a tough one for me, because I would have nightmares and, you know, couldn't sleep. And so every night, you know my brother. Yeah. You guys were the same year. Yeah. So he would read Peanut comics to me. And my mom and dad would just pray every night, and eventually, I got through it.
Yeah.
But there I realized, because when they prayed, I would get peace.
Yeah.
And then I realized, man, the Lord is real, but the enemy is also real. You kind of, I think I encountered both at the same time. Sure, that's amazing. But what a privilege. Do you have siblings?
Yes, I do. Younger sister. She's about 3 years younger than I am. Yeah.
Okay. You're the old brother?
Older brother, yeah.
Okay, all right. Did you also experience the whole thing of when you're the oldest, there's very strict rules for you, and then they kind of get a little less for your sibling, especially if it's a girl?
No.
No?
No, it
But
wasn't
your parents were like straight down the middle?
In some things,
Yeah.
but in other things they were, quite lenient. Because I can remember from very young, from whenever I can remember, I wouldn't go to bed very early. I usually went to bed about 9:30.
Okay.
Even from early in primary school.
Wow.
And there's positives and negatives to it because you don't get enough sleep.
Yeah.
It's bad. But also, that sometimes the best family times happen when everybody's
In the
actually,
evening.
they've gotten over their day, they have had an opportunity to breathe a little. So that was in another way, not a bad thing.
What did your dad do for a living?
So he was a teacher,
Okay.
for the most part of his, let's say, adult working life. And then when I was in my matric year, we had a family wine farm, which had been rented out to, some other farmers. And then so he went in and farmed for 10 years on that farm.
Oh, wow. That's quite a shift.
Yes, until he then basically retired and my
Okay.
folks, they went to live in Lambert's Bay by the sea.
Are they still alive?
Yeah, so my father passed about 9 years ago.
Sorry to hear that, Sean. Okay.
Yeah, it was a traumatic event in a boat accident where him and three
So
of his friends were out on the sea, and 3 passed and 1 survived.
Yup.
But my mom, thankfully, she was able to remarry
Okay.
and a good man, and we're really thankful. And so she and her husband, they still live out in Lambert's Bay, and they're in their community,
Okay.
and it's good. The Lord has been good despite the things of life.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a big thing to go through, man. I was just recently with a guy in our church whose mom had a sick bed for a long time. And I mean, that happened immediately. It was like a sudden thing, and then you have these ones where it's coming. I don't know which is worse. Like, I think both has its grief. The grief, the trauma, dealing with that stuff. It must be really hard. But sure.
The one thing I would say, not to labor it, but I had a fear of seeing my father growing old and becoming weakened and, going backwards.
Wow.
Physically, because, he was a provincial rugby player. He was always this really strong guy, almost 2 meters in length,
Sure.
really athletic and all that. And what I do thank God for is that, he was he passed when he was 63 years old, reasonably young.
That's quite young, yeah.
Young still. And he was still very strong, he could, outwork me, in anything physical without a flinch. But
Okay.
so I was spared that, to see him actually age and,
Sure.
so I'm thankful for that.
Was your mom a teacher as well? Many times teachers marry teachers.
Indeed.
Okay.
Correct. Both studied at Wellington.
Same with me.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So-
I think how old's your mom now?
My mom is now, she's born in 52, so she would be 72 going on 73. Yeah.
Our parents probably knew each other.
Yeah.
We should actually...
Yeah, I think that my folks spoke of your parents.
Yeah,
in
because
the
they
past,
should have been there at the same time. That's crazy.
Indeed.
I did not know that. Or I forgot that. But either way, that's pretty cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
Like, I
Yes.
heard that so many times. Like, it was like, my dad was a teacher at Paul Roos for a very long time.
Yes.
And I was actually born in Prima Nova.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's the big story. I was a baby there, and my dad was the koshuisvader.
Can you believe that?
Yeah, no, it's crazy.
Wow.
But they also both eventually went into different directions. But I'm also a child of teachers.
Yes.
So, yeah, we actually have a lot in common. That's crazy.
True.
I love it. Okay, so tell me from life after studying, you have got a beautiful wife, you've got beautiful children.
Yeah.
How did that all come about?
Yeah, I mean, could tell a long story, but after my studies, I went to London for 2 years to go help plant a church there.
Wow.
Yeah,
Most people go to just make some money.
Yeah, that was me.
You didn't go and sell your blood. Like I heard some horror stories. Because in our time back then, that was the thing. You go to London. I hear now it's going to work on the boats.
Okay.
So that's the new thing. But that was the thing. You went to London. But you went to plant a church. Which church was that?
So the first shofar congregation in Wimbledon in London. They just sent a pastor's couple, the Van der Merwes, Andries van der Merwe and his wife Liesel, and so Lise, and I experienced the Lord calling me to go serve them, to go join them.
Did you join shofar while studying?
While I was at Stellenbosch
Because then they were quite new on campus.
Yeah. I made the let's say the move from the Dutch Reformed Church to shofar about 2002, so my 4th year of study.
Okay.
Yeah, so spent 2 years there, came back, did my articles, also did a master's in taxation at the same time at Stellenbosch. Then spent 6 years with PricewaterhouseCoopers in their tax department.
Wow.
But at that time, I experienced a little bit of a challenge, kind of a midlife crisis, but looking back,
Quarter-life crisis.
a quarter-life crisis at 32.
Sure.
But it was the Lord at work.
Okay,
You know,
okay.
When I look back, it's undeniable that God was starting to, prepare me for where He was wanting to take me.
All right.
And so I got, let's say, quite. I can't find the right word, but it wasn't.
Kan Afrikaans sê as dit jou gaan help?
Yeah, I don't think that'll help either.
Lost it in both languages.
Both languages. Yeah, I just felt
Onvergenoegd.
I don't think
Not quite that.
No,
Okay.
I just felt that it didn't make sense anymore to be doing what I was doing, because we were saving really high net worth individuals and large corporate companies on their tax bill. And that meant that for some people they wouldn't only have one holiday home at the sea; they would have a second, third, and a fourth one. And they would.
You were making a difference.
Indeed,
in rich people's lives.
Indeed, and I'm not saying that
Yeah, I hear you.
people who are blessed in that way by God don't give back. Of course, they do give back. So it's not to say that someone who does that is not doing a great thing in the kingdom.
No, but you just started feeling, maybe this is not for me.
For me, correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And so the Lord took me on a journey which then led to what today is known as Cause for Justice. Of course, it was not an organization that was all my doing. It was more God was at work in multiple people's lives at the same time.
Okay.
And then brought a group of 4 together who then said, well, then let's do this. We believe it's from God, and so let's start walking this road with Him.
How did your paths cross? These 4?
Yeah, so we were all in the same church.
Okay, that helps.
At Stellenbosch at the time. And the one friend was an attorney. We then became partners in a attorney's firm we started up in Stellenbosch in 2013.
Okay.
Which is when I made the jump from PricewaterhouseCoopers to whatever we have
working for yourself.
Wherever God's hands would catch me, basically.
That's a big jump. Yeah.
Yeah, and at the time it was not the easiest decision. My wife and I, we'd already been, in a relationship. Let me think, was it about a year, maybe closer to 2 years?
Just dating at this stage?
Yes.
Okay.
It was probably a year and a half by then.
So did you guys meet at about 30-ish? Because you say that this was at 32.
So we met in the year when I turned 31.
Okay.
But at the time, I'd gone through a very, very tough breakup, which I don't feel comfortable to share here.
That's fine.
But at the time, I wasn't ready for a relationship, and I said to her, quite early on, that this is probably going to be a slog.
Okay.
But if you're willing, then let's trust God.
Sure.
So, but
did you guys also meet through the church?
So we met at work. I was at PwC.
And she was there as well?
She was appointed, and, so we sat on the same floor.
Legal or financial?
Well, she comes from the financial side. I'm from the legal side. But in tax, it's the place where legal and accounting actually meet.
Okay. No, that's what I was asking. Okay.
Yeah, and that's how legal and accounting did meet in our case.
There is a way. It's called tax.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, so... but making the jump, going out of a job where you've got a cush salary and all of that was difficult, especially with my in-laws, to say, well, I still have a plan with your daughter, but at the moment, I've got not zero prospects, because my prospects was God, and that God is good, and that He looks after His children, and you can't get, better security than that.
Amen.
But still, there are other things that if you are good parents, you would look for some.
You wanna know
some foundations.
Of course.
What's been building on faith. So that meant that we didn't marry that quickly.
Okay.
So got married early in 2015. I was 34 at the time.
Okay.
Yeah, so reasonably late. And then the Lord's been good to us, over the last, it's been 10 years now. On the 21st of March.
Congrats.
We had 10 years, so.
March is a great month. It's my birthday, man.
Yeah. So, no, the Lord's been good to us. And two beautiful daughters, from our marriage. The oldest one, she's in grade 1 now. And the younger one, she's in whatever it is, grade RRR. She turns 4. She turns 4 this year.
A lot of R's.
Yeah.
I actually wonder where the R comes from. It's a very strange code. But anyway, we've also been through that a few times.
Yes.
That's awesome, man. Family is so special. Just before we move on to more work-related stuff, having been a husband now for 10 years, having been a father for a while, what are your biggest sort of takeaways or lessons, let's call it lessons, that you've learned about the importance of marriage, importance of family?
Yeah. Well, I would say that, we are all here by the grace of God, and all marriages, are what they are by the grace of God. So I just think that marriage and family, in a sense, is kind of an amplifier, where you're still clinging on to the flesh or whatever it is, then marriage will amplify that for you. And that's a very good thing, because our calling, in our walk with God is to put to death, our flesh, and to, let God create the spirit man that is pleasing to Him in our lives. And so, it's a process in that sense, but it's something that God can use so wonderfully well on our journey of becoming more like Jesus. And so I would say the takeaway is don't fight God, because that doesn't end well for anyone.
No, true. Someone else has said it's being married is like having a mirror held up to you
indeed
every day. And you're like, oh man, is that what I really look like? And then it's like, ooh, I need to change. Lord help me.
But be merciful, please, God.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, how patient is God with us? My goodness. I'm so grateful. The older I get, the more I'm like just aware of the grace. Yeah.
Indeed.
And parenting, biggest lessons you've taken from parenting?
This might be an interesting one, but that we shouldn't be blind to the fact that we can learn a lot from our children. When God says, how are you to be in my kingdom? It's become like a little child. So if we are to learn how to be, children of God, it's not a bad thing to be looking at how your children relate to you, because they haven't been, in a sense, socialized by all the bad stuff of the world that's going on. So I mean, you would probably say the same, but the thing about pitching up is really, really important, and I try and do that as much as is possible. Given
you mean be present?
Being present, yeah. And I wouldn't say, be there for every single thing all the time, but there are big things, coming on. So, for example, this afternoon, my daughter, and she's playing a netball match, under 7, whatever it is, and I've got a good idea that they're probably going to lose this game. And so last week, there was the first game of the season, and they won their match. Yeah. And it was great to be there for that match. And I'm thinking, I probably need to be there today, because the first loss is also something that's quite an important, let's say, event to process.
It's tough.
And if you could process that with the right people, and your closest people, that's a better scenario than, just crying on your own or whatever.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So I probably will push back work today to be at the game.
Well done. And I think you make a good point. Parenting is, many of the moments is discerning.
Yes.
I think it's like, do I fight this battle with my child, or do I have mercy and grace? Do I attend this thing or not? Weighing up work commitments or my wife relationship with stuff that the kids are doing or need to do. Yeah. Sometimes it's very much on merit in the moment. Lord, show me, those kinds of things. And I find with my kids getting older, communication is key. Like sometimes I've missed stuff that, it's not the most important thing, but it's important to them.
Yeah.
And we need to explain the reason why. We can't be there is this and this and this, but, we've arranged that Oma and Opa will be there, or whatever the case might be. Yeah. But, you're right. The big things, the obvious ones, you can't miss. Like, I've asked my children straight, and they've told me, don't miss a birthday.
Okay.
Don't miss a birthday. I'm like, okay. I can work around that, yeah. I remember missing Leon's, my oldest. I missed 2 of his birthdays in a row. When he was very young.
Oh.
And it was completely out of my control every time. And it was so difficult to explain that. But since I don't hear the end of it. Yeah, but remember, you forgot my birthday. You weren't at I'm like, please forgive me. Like, we need to move on from this. Oh. But I mean, one of the reasons I'm asking you about family marriage is because it's one of the main things you are fighting for in your work.
Indeed. Yeah.
Why is that? Why do you stand up for these things that you yourself have and enjoy? Why do you stand up for marriage? Why do you stand up for family?
Yeah. So I mean, I think that goes back to the call of the Lord, and there's a long story and a journey also to that. But what I would say is that God made the world, the created world, in a certain way, and if we don't take that seriously and we don't actually set up, let's say, societal structures, institutions, the laws that govern us in accordance with that, and not to, let's say, oppose or conflict with that, it's not only that individuals get hurt by it, but actually whole communities and the whole of society suffer tremendously when we go against God's blueprint or His pattern, let's say, for family.
Flesh that out. Why? Why does that happen? Why does the family affect society so much?
Yeah, so I think if we go back to Genesis 1 and 2, when God says, how He created man, what He created mankind for, then that creational mandate is pretty clear. He made men and women. He made them for a purpose, which is to extend God's kingdom into the rest of the world, because they were in the garden, but they were actually to go and populate the world outside the garden, and to make that into the principles and the values of that garden, to take that to a larger scale. Part of that is procreation, being fruitful and multiplying, also physically. And when we do that, which is something that's imprinted in us, people can't help but do that. So even if someone doesn't have respect for God or His word, they will still have a sex drive. You just can't get away from it.
They can still make babies.
Correct.
Yeah.
But if that doesn't happen within the context and the confines that God set out for that, in relationship of husband and wife, then father and son and daughter, and sons and daughters will then again become husbands and wives, and mothers and fathers, they will graduate to grandparents, and so you see this whole family playing out just from 2 chapters, the first 2 chapters of the Bible. Yes, it's a biological thing, but then he goes from male and female, then he goes to man and woman. And what will they do? The man will leave his father and his mother, Okay, he will leave the one family. What will he do? He will cleave to his wife. They will create a new family.
Come on.
And then the whole cycle repeats itself. But when we go outside of that, the hurt and the devastation is multiplied, and you only need to read one chapter on, actually 2 chapters, because in Genesis 4, what happens? The first murder happens. And who kills who? A brother kills his own brother.
Sure.
So that's now not to say that that relationship was not healthy in the sense of it was not within the confines of husband and wife and mother and father. I think that was intact, but obviously we're talking about what happens when sin enters in.
Yeah.
And so what I think a lot of people, sometimes meaning well, get wrong is that humanity at its heart is not good. I think there's a good way that one of the guys I've read a little bit of, Warren Roberts, he talks about human beings being flawed masterpieces. So we've been made in God's image, but we are flawed, in a sense, fatally flawed, unless we are, taught to walk in God's ways and then choose to walk in His ways, submitting and surrendering to His ways, we will cause, utter destruction where we go. So I think we have to take that seriously, and I think God has given me some kind of revelation about the importance of that, and that family, then has an impact on communities. Communities make up nations, and that has then this global impact in the end.
Yeah, I mean, another way of saying it, I think, is marriage and the nuclear family is actually the nucleus of society.
Correct.
That's what it's. If you break it down, that's what it is. That's what it's supposed to be. But unfortunately, we see less and less that is the case. I mean, in our own nation, this well. We've got a 2/3 fatherless crisis. Fatherlessness is one of the biggest pandemics of our time that's having the most horrific impact on especially young people's lives.
Yeah.
And then there's the knock-on effect, because a broken son becomes a broken man, becomes a broken husband, and doesn't know how to raise children well. And typically they run away, they do all kinds of, and then the cycle just repeats. And now we have generations of that. So you are one of the few that I know that are standing in the gap for marriage, for family, in a practical way. And this is so necessary. I think, there's a role for the church to play. There's a role for counselors to play. There's all these spheres. But you're one of the few that take this on in the legal realm. And let's talk about that a bit. You started Cause for Justice. Yeah. Why that name? And what is your main overarching mission?
Yeah. So Cause for Justice actually comes from a scripture which is 1 Samuel 17 verse 29, where David was going up against Goliath, and he came to the battlefield to bring supplies from home from his father to his brothers, and then he heard what was going on about Goliath taunting God and the people of God, and he was saying, well, this is completely wrong and somebody needs to do something. And his oldest brother then basically rebukes him and say, I know what's in your heart. You're coming out, you just want to see the battle. And he then says, well, no, is there not a cause? Shouldn't somebody be doing something?
Wow.
And so that was sort of the scripture that was the foundation for this organization. And our very first case that we did was against the pornography industry in South Africa, a case that happened over the course of about 2.5 years, from 2013 to 2015, where a subscription broadcaster in South Africa wanted to start airing 3 dedicated pornography channels as part of their suite of products. So they're a competitor to DSTV. They did their research and found the only way that you can take away market share or eyeballs in the subscription television environment is either with sports. You need to be first to contract, Premier League or whatever it is, or pornography.
Sadly, yeah.
Yeah. So that's the way you can go forward.
Sure.
So they asked the South African Broadcasting Authority if they could, have permission to add these 3 channels. And lo and behold, the Broadcasting Authority gave them permission. And so ourselves and 2 other organizations at the time, said, well, this can't be right. And somebody needs to do something. At the time,
was it going to be just free to air?
No.
For anyone,
subscription.
Okay.
So you would have need to sign
but still,
up. Yeah,
it's available. Oh.
Correct. So ourselves, we'd only just been founded at the time. Actually,
sure.
We were founded in June of 2013, and in July of that year, a month later, was when everything started. In that case. And again, it's a beautiful story about how we were absolutely green. We had nothing really to go on but the fact that
you knew this had to stop.
Yes, and we had a conviction that we were there on God's call.
Wow.
And so, I remember when we sat in court on the 4th day of a 4-day hearing, and we were completely out of it. I think
out of your depth.
Well,
or what?
I would say just in terms of where the case had been going.
Okay.
And it was pretty clear at the time that we wouldn't be successful in this challenge of the Broadcasting Authority's decision to allow these channels to be aired. But then, again, something miraculous happened. With my partner in our law firm, I remember tapping me on the shoulder and saying, well, God said to him that he's going to enter the courtroom now. And so we were pretty much, looking out for a rushing wind, the judge being blown off his chair or something like that. But at the same time, which I only, found out afterwards, our advocate was sitting on the other side of me, and he started paging through the authorities bundle. So, all the legislation, court cases, looking for that silver bullet, that everybody says doesn't exist.
Okay.
But on that day, we found out it does exist.
Wow.
But I think it's more a case of, it's a bullet from God, which is completely unstoppable, of course.
Amazing.
So
like David Stone to Goliath.
Exactly.
Yeah, you found it.
Pretty much.
Come on.
Yeah, and so he found this section in the Film and Publications Act, which basically said, if you broke it down, that you can't air pornography on television in South Africa.
Wow.
And, we were looking at each other sort of, but this is exactly what the case is about. And we've been preparing these, amazing arguments about, how this is against, the Constitution and all those kind of things.
Meantime, there's already a law.
It's already been written.
Wow.
Yeah? So
that's amazing.
Yeah, and so we presented that argument. Actually, one of the other parties went before us because we were 3 applicants, in the judicial review application. And so we said to them, whatever you had prepared, it doesn't matter. Because in your reply, this is what you should say. And they actually then agreed with us. And the response of the judge, I think, was one of the most beautiful things I've seen in my life. He just went into this very high-pitched voice and he said, but this can't be. This can't be.
Really? Oh, wow.
Completely shocked.
Really? So he's about to rule that it can happen.
Everything was going in one direction. And this
Wow.
one thing, comes out of the blue.
Crazy.
And the case completely flipped over to the other side. He was a very, very well-known and also a very experienced judge. And so he actually had us come back 2 months later to come argue just this one single point. To basically to ask, would this be the issue that will determine the case or not? Because if it's right, then we have to win.
Yeah.
And so we came back. That was in October of 2014 that we went back. But at the time, you could see the judge had made up his mind in a way. The law is what the law is. And he wasn't going to go
In
against
this case,
that.
we say, thank God that the law is what it is.
Indeed. Indeed it is. And so I think what we learned from that first, let's say, experience, of trusting God and waiting out was, never to despise the day of humble beginnings.
Yes.
That day when basically it's you standing basically stark naked against whatever there is.
You were David against Goliath. I mean, that's a beautiful origin story. The fact that you got your scripture from that story, the fact that you were looking for the silver bullet, the stone, Goliath is there. Everything in their minds makes sense. Like, why not? This is free speech. This is whatever their arguments were.
Correct.
And you're like, God says, I'm about to move. Man, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And I love that your friend felt God says, I'm in the room, and then it came.
Correct.
That's such a testimony.
It is, yeah.
You can't, how can you argue with that?
Yeah.
That's so beautiful. I love that. That's encouraging.
Yeah. And so that was our first case that we did. And by the Lord's grace, because we won, the other parties on the other side had to pay our legal costs. So there was a
Thank God.
Financial boost coming out of it as well.
Yeah.
So in that sense, God was really, really good to us.
Sure.
It was good.
That's so cool. It's interesting. I just recently started watching this new series about the House of David.
Oh, yeah.
And they really did a great job of, cinematically showing that scene with David coming to the battleground. And I mean, I love that story. It's such a powerful story. If you go read it word for word in the Old Testament, it is truly powerful. I mean, that whole interaction between David and his brother, he got all the reasons to go home.
Yeah.
Was given to him. Like, you don't belong here, you're too small, you're too young, you're not strong enough, you don't have the necessary gear, and you guys must have felt that way. Yeah. Like, who the heck are we? Like, you must have had imposter syndrome, like struggle with, we don't have all the gears, all the stuff we need. All these other people have these fancy suits and briefcases and what. It must have been something like that. But you went, no, but God said.
Yeah.
And that makes all the difference. And I want to say, well done. That's boldness. That's courage. Yeah. I'm thinking of, one of the scriptures that this show is based on is Acts 4, where Peter and John, had their first interaction of resistance from the religious leaders, and they come back to the other apostles, and then they pray for more boldness.
Yes.
And then the room shakes, and then they go out and they keep doing what they were told not to do because they knew that God spoke. I love that. Yeah. So that's encouraging. Well done, man. I love it. That's cool. And I'm sure that, you started with a victory, but I'm sure it wasn't always fun and games and exactly the way you wanted things to go.
No.
Yeah. How did things go from there?
Well, in terms of the organization and growth and so on.
For justice.
Yeah. So for the first 3 years, it was really just something that we did on the side.
Okay.
I got out of Price Waterhouse and we started an attorney's firm in Stellenbosch. That was a way for us to, earn a living and have some income.
Yeah, actually put food on the table.
Yes. Yeah. And then, as time allowed and as God brought things our way, we got involved in other things. First court case on the proposed legalization of euthanasia. To declare it to not be either murder or culpable homicide anymore.
Wow.
That was a case. We had a case, the OGOD case, which was about religion in public schools. In both cases, we were actually successful.
That's amazing.
For the most part. The one in the euthanasia case got decided in our favor in the Supreme Court of Appeal with a very, very strong judgment from the Supreme Court of Appeal. And the other side, as with our first case, the Top TV case, the other side didn't then take it to the Constitutional Court because their prospects were just not there that they would have any kind of success there.
That's amazing.
And then I think it was about 2017 when we went out, spoke to some business people, told them about this vision, invited them to come alongside, support and whatever. And so we then started getting some funding together.
Okay.
And in 2018, I think it was when we appointed our first, staff member, in addition to myself. And since then, it's been a journey where, there's been growth and then there's been COVID and then there was, some, also, becoming smaller again, and the Lord bringing some other things over our path, which has been really beautiful and fruitful in many ways.
Okay.
And at the moment, we've got a team, an office team of about 6, maybe 7, and most of them are doing it part-time.
Okay.
Myself and one other person is reasonably full-time in it.
Okay.
But the team as it is now is a lot better than, I would say, 2 years ago when it was basically myself. At the start of 2023, it was literally myself again.
Sure.
I think as the consequences and the impact of COVID had played out, we got to a point where we were, at a little bit of a smaller scale again. But the things that have happened, especially the last 2 years, have been incredibly encouraging. So
awesome.
Very thankful, yeah.
All right, well, tell us a bit about that. You guys are currently you're fighting some big battles against some big cases, or big cases that you are dealing with.
Yeah.
Fill us in a little bit. What are the subjects and how's it going? The progress.
Yes. So one of the major things that have been coming on over the last, I would say at least 6, maybe 7 years, is the whole gender revolution, which again, as the sexual revolution had its origins in the USA, social science departments. If I had to be really, let's say, negative about it, I think when there's too much money to go around, people get too much opportunities to follow really bad things in terms of thoughts and ideas, and how does this change this area and so on. And
comfort and convenience, sitting around thinking about new weird things. So.
Yeah, and in academic space, if it's not there with express purpose to glorify God in what we're doing, it can only go one other way. So the whole gender revolution has been quite destructive.
Yeah.
And we're seeing a lot of that playing out, and a lot of it has been played out in the US and other developed Western countries, where we see, women being basically demanded that they give up their private spaces, in locker rooms, in toilets even, that kind of thing, which, I would have thought is completely,
Yeah, we never see that happen. I mean, we didn't even think anything like that's possible.
Yes.
And now it's a reality.
Yeah.
And there are court cases about it. I mean, there had to be a court case recently to say what a woman is.
Exactly.
What world are we living in? I was looking at that thinking, in other news, water is wet. Like what?
Yeah, and
it's hectic.
It's one of those things where it's, when you think about it coldly, you realize that there's a lot of I want to say madness going on. I'm not saying the people who honestly and with their best intentions, are promoting this. I'm not saying they're mad. I'm just saying that what they believe, if you look at the foundations, it's clear that it's come from a foundation which over time has moved further and further away from how God made the world to be.
Yes.
And then eventually they end up at a point where we can't have certainty about what a man and a woman is. And so in that sense, it's quite sad. But
I'll say it. It is a little mad
of course.
When you are a biological male saying, I am a woman, and then someone says, well, what is a woman? And you say, I can't answer that.
Yeah.
But you just said, you are a woman. How can you say you are something and not be able to define it? That doesn't make any sense. But that's one of their biggest weapons, is they have detached from objective reality.
Yes.
They make you feel like you're the crazy one because you think logically, rationally, with common sense.
Correct.
And they've removed that. And it's happened over time, but it seems like it happened overnight.
Yeah.
And now we're in this world, and there are legal implications, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Legal and physical implications.
Yes.
For
health implications.
Yeah. For individuals, but then also for girls typically, who are hit hardest by all of this.
And you're a father of 2 girls. I mean, you must think of their future as well.
Absolutely. I've played that movie out a little bit in my head, and maybe you're at the same place. But I said to someone the other day, a family member, if it comes down to it, and the question is, are you okay with your grade 1 daughter sharing a bathroom with a grade 12 boy? A man, basically. There's no lengths that I would not be willing to go to.
Yeah.
To have that fight.
Yes.
We will have that fight, and I won't lose that fight.
Come on.
And that's not to say that I'm nasty. I'm not saying that I don't want other people to, be blessed and pursue, the good in terms of a good life. But there are certain boundaries in this world for very good reasons.
Yeah.
And if we just say anything goes, then unfortunately we see what we have been seeing over the last 50, 60 years in Western countries. But just to come back to your question, so there are a couple of cases now, and I could mention the names because it's not in that sense confidential, but two schools. The one is Stellenbosch High School in Stellenbosch, and the other one is Beaumont Primary School here in Somerset West. We've got court applications against them because they were not willing to give children, one in each school, the kind of accommodations that they are requiring because they make the claim that although they are biologically a certain sex, they want to identify or do identify in some sense with the other sex, and that identification or self-declaration, whatever you want to call it, that then must have physical consequences for how the school then relates to them.
The rest of the school has to fall in line and play along,
Yes.
which is one of the things I see becomes a legal matter. It's not even a moral matter.
No.
It's more a legal matter of rights that
Yes.
clash. Yeah.
Correct.
Please explain that. Because that's one of your main arguments, right?
Correct. Yeah. So I think again the issue has come in because South Africa, and not all countries in the world have this, but South Africa does actually distinguish in its law when it comes to equality and non-discrimination grounds. We've got a ground of sex, so you can't discriminate on the basis of sex, but also the ground of gender. You can't discriminate on the basis of gender. And so gender in, let's say, in a sense that we would understand from a biblical worldview, that would be, okay, what length of hair do you like to, wear? How long do you want to wear your hair? What kind of clothes do you like wearing? That kind of thing. So it's a lot more about preference and how you express your maleness as a male. How do you express your femaleness as a female? But that now, as you've already noted, through social sciences and developments that's come, and it's now also in the medical field, gender has been detached from sex completely. So, in other words, whatever you do and your preference, that is what you are. And the world has to accept that. It doesn't matter what your biology says. It only matters how you self-identify and how you express that.
So feelings, lived experience trumps biology.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah. So that is the claim, and I think the counter to that will again be Genesis 1 and 2. Is that God made men and women, and men and women have certain roles that if they fulfill it, then that is actually a blessing to them, to their families, and to society. To do anything other than that has consequences, and that is not positive. That actually is destructive.
Absolutely, but sometimes you can't bring the Bible in.
No.
You as a legal mind, you need to bring arguments that make legal sense.
Correct.
So let's say a child is in the situation, he wants to now, he and his parents, or she and her parents, want to force the school to play along with their belief.
Yeah.
What is the legal matter there? Because this is partly why your path and my path crossed a couple of years ago, is because I was in the situation with our kids' school where they just told us a biological male is now going to be accommodated as a female, and it affected my child directly and a bunch of others, and I had questions. And first of all and foremost, how did you make this decision without talking to all of us?
Correct.
This will have an effect on my child. There will be questions that need to be answered.
Yes.
And there's this, we're not allowed to discriminate. But to me, that seemed like discrimination towards my child. And it seemed like you're forcing an ideology and a way of thinking onto my child that I'm not comfortable with.
Yeah. Yes.
And surely that's not right.
Yes.
But maybe help us understand what's the legal argument there.
So the legal argument typically would be that either someone is male or female. That's the two options you have. If you then come with an argument to say that despite this person's biology, they are actually of the other sex or gender, what you've done, and this is sometimes quite difficult for people to accept that what they've done, is you've said that what a human being is determined solely, or let's say ultimately, by what you think about yourself. Again, I have to, bring it back to a biblical understanding of what a human being is. A human being is that integration of spirit and body. So you can't say that you are a spirit living inside of a body. Your body is you, and your spirit is you. You can't make that distinction to say that, no, I'm no longer my body. Your body is what you are. And so
I would actually argue that you're talking about soul
yes.
more than spirit.
Yeah.
But maybe that's getting too technical. But I think that what people are experiencing when they have something like gender dysphoria
yes.
is on the soul level, and there's confusion.
Correct.
Because there's hurt.
That's right.
And now. Yeah, sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but that for me is important to bring across.
Yeah. So typically on a legal level, one would say, so are we dealing with, let's say it's a biological boy. Are we dealing with a girl, or are we dealing with a boy that suffers from some other clinical condition? If it is the case that we're dealing with a boy who suffers from a real clinical condition, gender dysphoria, then we would obviously see how we can assist this child to make their experience within a, let's say, collective environment, a social environment like a school, less distressing to them. Because it's very real what they're going through. We shouldn't say that what they're going through isn't real. Of course it's real. But to then say, but no, this boy is actually a girl. That is an ideology, because the only way you could get there is if you then accept before making that claim that your body is irrelevant to your identity. It can't be a kind of a boundary that determines, what your identity is. And so that's typically, where one would, from a legal perspective, make the distinction to say that, well, we accept that this is a child that suffers with something real. Schools should reasonably accommodate children with whatever struggle they go through. Some kids have, a mental disability or even a physical disability, it could be.
Yeah.
And this might be another case of someone that needs to be accommodated somehow within the school environment without pushing them out, but just to say that, well, while we want to assist you, we can't accept this ideological view that you are no longer a boy because you don't feel like one.
Yeah. The affirming approach can be more damaging than just being aware of and bringing helpful ways to guide the child.
That's right.
But also, and you must confirm if I'm correct here, there are very few cases of genuine gender dysphoria.
Yeah.
But what we've seen since COVID and the uptake of social media, TikTok, and all these things is a massive rise.
Correct.
In young kids who are, I'm just going to say it, screaming for attention because of hurt or whatever, and now they're jumping on the bandwagon. And there's a specific term for it. Quick onset, something
rapid
onset
gender dysphoria.
Yeah, so which is not real in the sense of it's not a real psychological situation. They are just seeing that this is a popular thing in a way that's been made popular by activists, I believe, and now they're jumping on the bandwagon. So I think two things is wrong with that. The children who really have gender dysphoria probably are not getting the proper help, or they are now part of this mass and they're not really getting the proper attention. And at the same time, you're creating all this chaos in that child's life, and now everyone just has to adapt and play along. And in a way, we are all forced to play along with a make-believe show.
Correct.
That we never signed up for. Am I right?
That is unfortunately what it is. It's so difficult for me and you to talk about this without sounding almost that we're not compassionate.
Yeah,
but the
it's
thing
not
is,
that.
we are compassionate, but there are certain boundaries, and when you cross them, real people get really hurt.
Yes.
And this is what the people in the UK, the government, even the courts now have become to acknowledge, is that when you follow this path, when you say, well, no, this child is actually someone of the other sex or gender, and we now have to from the medical side intervene so that their bodies won't develop in a way that is at odds with what they think or feel about themselves. We're talking about blocking their puberty when it's not a case of precocious puberty, early puberty. It's onset of puberty when it's supposed to happen, which is a healthy process.
It's stopping it completely, yeah.
Yeah, so they're blocking it off and then following on with synthetic hormones of the opposite sex so that the child's body does not develop as a boy's body would, but then actually develops like the child was a girl, growing breasts and all of those kind of things. And then ultimately, obviously, it ends in the total destruction, basically, of the reproductive system when you get to surgeries and things like that to remove parts of the reproductive system. And that the UK government and some other governments have now, clamped off on. With things like the CAS review, which is something that is quite recent in the last 2 or 3 years, where they did a full overview or a review of all the available research, all the clinical research out there to ask whether this is actually a good thing. Is this gender affirming healthcare approach actually a good thing for those children who are going through this? And they've said no. Number one, the benefits is not clear. We can't see that it's actually helping the kids with their dysphoria. And secondly, there's a lot of damage in terms of the side effects. It's really not a good thing. And so they've now put a complete ban on it in the UK.
Sure.
That if a child is diagnosed with gender dysphoria, you're not allowed to give them puberty blockers. They're not leaving that child out in the cold. They're just saying, well, what we have to be doing is we're looking what is causing this.
Proper care, yeah.
Right, because I think what's gone out the window over the last, let's say, 14 years or so is, okay, well, the child is presenting with this. Why?
Yeah.
Why has gone out the window? It's just been, okay, the child wants this. Because the child wants this, then that is the medical justification for pushing them down, a road.
And that seems to be an obvious question that psychiatrists, psychologists, doctors should be asking before, they do harm.
Yes.
Which is what has been happening. I mean, there are cases, as far as I know, of children now suing their parents and doctors for doing irreparable damage to their bodies. Correct. Is that correct?
That is correct. We haven't had one yet in South Africa, although there's a case at the moment that is building.
How scary is that? That we, as a legal system, and as schools, and as the society, are completely ignorant of so-called first world nations who've already gone down this rabbit hole. They've seen it doesn't work.
Yeah.
There are consequences. They are closing down clinics. They are shutting down things. But we're like, no. Here, it's going to work. I mean, what is that mindset? For me, that's a little crazy.
Yeah.
Why would we go down the same road?
I think that does speak a lot about, you can use many words for it. Social imaginary. You can talk about, the prevailing worldview of the day. But because we live in this, let's say, world these days where it's seen as something negative and something bad if you question someone's, let's say, most deeply held desires or needs or wants or how they identify.
I hear the term is lived experience.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah. So that is seen as the ultimate sin. The ultimate wrong you could be doing is if you question someone on what they say about how they feel and how they identify. And because that is the case, then the only other option is, well, then we have to accept what the person says at all cost. And I've seen some of the things coming out of a really radical part of, let's say, this medicalization sort of side of the debate, where some of the activists would say, well, that's just the cost of the choice that they made. So if they end up being sterilized and losing function and things like that, I mean, that's not our problem.
Wow.
That's their problem. And that is
where's the love suddenly? That's not loving. That's hectic.
There's always
they turn against the detransitioners. They are turning against them and attacking them when they say, well, you were never real. It's like, if you've lost everything and your future, your bone density is gone, you are sterilized, you are leaking out of areas of your body that cannot stop. Your life is destroyed.
Yeah.
And now the people that were your allies are turning on you. That's not love.
It reminds me a little bit of Marxism in that sense, because the
you're not allowed to say that, Rayan.
No, sure. Well, I'm not.
No,
I'm not
please go. I agree.
Criticize that. I want to make a bit of a comparison, which is that when somebody criticizes Marxism, one of the comebacks is, no, we just haven't seen it implemented right yet.
Oh my word!
So it's
like socialism.
It will work.
Here it will work. We know how to do it.
And in that sense, one of the arguments I've also heard is, the surgeries and so on is just getting better still. And we will get to a place where it's much better. And the type of consequences that people experience won't be as bad. So we just got to push through. And then the skills in terms of the surgeons, how well they do it.
That is terrible.
So
we just use all these children as guinea pigs.
We're experimenting until we get to a place.
Human experiments. Oh my word. Do they hear themselves? This is horrifying.
Yeah, it unfortunately is what it is. So.
But you can't change DNA. That's the thing. I mean, this has been proven. Scientists who are doing this should know. Yeah. They are messing with DNA that cannot be changed. Yeah. Someone made a good point. Said if we take all the people now that have decided they are the other gender, and they die, and we found 100 years from now, someone finds their bodies, and they test the bones, they will just find men and women bones.
Correct.
And that will define them. And that's a good point.
Yeah. You
cannot change your fundamental chromosomes and DNA. It doesn't change. But
That's
people
right.
are fighting against this. And deep down, they've got issues. They are hurting. They need proper help. I think one of the best analogies to this situation is the anorexic one. If someone is truly anorexic and struggling, you don't keep telling them, you are fat.
Yeah.
You should eat less.
Yeah.
But that is the equivalent. That's the equivalent of what's happening, and there must be a better way to help people who are really struggling.
Yeah. Again, you can't get to a place where what's happening now makes any rational sense unless you have the history of how it developed over the last 100 years and then sped up, over the last 50 years.
Yes.
But when you go read into where this came from and how a brick was laid. A bad brick, then a second bad brick was laid onto that one. So the bad bricks, they make rational sense in relation to each other. But the first brick, the first irrational brick, doesn't make sense in relation to, true reality about, what is a man, what is a woman. But so I understand where people come from when they would actually defend this as a rational position. It is a rational position if you see where it all came from. But as a collective view, it's still irrational because it doesn't take serious what a human being is to begin with. I mean, that's one of the cases or two cases that are going on. We also have about 4 complaints with the Health Professions Council of doctors who have, stood up in South Africa against the gender affirming care approach. And so we're assisting them, defending them in those complaints cases.
So it's courageous doctors who have looked at the evidence and they are going, we are called to first do no harm.
Correct.
This is doing harm. And now they're being attacked and you guys are defending them.
Correct, yeah.
Wow.
So it's part of the legal work we do. as well.
And how are those cases going in general? I don't know, you can't speak specifics, but is it positive? Is it looking good? Or is it looking like, listen, the hammer's coming down on them?
It's very early on, but we had the very, very first case in South Africa with the Health Professions Council on this issue was actually in 2020.
Okay.
With a psychiatrist at the time who was also, received a complaint. And that case was resolved in that specific doctor's favor. And I think, because the medical evidence over the last 5 years, because it's another 5 years on from 2020, the medical evidence has only gone one way.
Yeah.
Right? Which is to say that it's clearly not good.
It's proving what God's word says. Let's be honest. Yeah.
That's right. So it's difficult to speculate up front. But what I would say, if the Health Professions Council was to take biology and even psychiatry, and all the medical fields seriously, and the impact of what this gender affirming approach is doing to children and even to adults, I can't imagine that they would fight against these doctors, because they're not trying to do anything revolutionary, although it's seen as that. All they're asking is, let's not harm people until we know that what we're doing is not harming them.
Yeah, I think there's a very simple solution. Let the child go through puberty.
Yeah.
Just let them go through puberty. Don't do it now. I mean, there's rational, good thinking behind, you don't put a gun in a child's hand.
Correct.
You don't let a child drive a car. You don't let a child use alcohol. There's good reasons for that.
You don't let them vote.
Even if they want to.
Yeah.
But somehow, if they think they're a different gender, keeping in mind that children play make-believe all the time. My girl has been a unicorn and a sheep and a dog, and when she's playing. But she knows there's a difference.
Yeah.
But when we start over-affirming craziness, that's when the unhealthy stuff starts coming in.
Yeah.
And I think you asked a great question. Why? Why would some children have genuine gender dysphoria, and why would others jump on a bandwagon? Seemingly to get attention, but what's the deeper why? Do you have an answer for that why? Do you have a speculation that you can share?
Well, if you look at where it all started, the rapid onset thing really came after the smartphone revolution.
Okay.
So people had quick access through a handheld device to the ideas of anyone and everyone all over the world. The way the algorithms has been set up on many of the apps we use, the YouTubes, the Facebooks, the whatever else, is that, you might find something that's really interesting, or, that evokes some curiosity in you. And you might, do 1, 2, or 3 of the same kind of thing. And then the rabbit hole takes you in one direction. And unfortunately, well, maybe not unfortunately, it's just the reality that children are very impressionable. There are many reasons for that. Some of it goes down to brain science. Haven't got fully developed prefrontal cortex about decision making. Is it good for me to keep on watching these videos and, all of the same kind of stuff, which only settles at, I think, 25 or 26 years in any case. But, that seems to be one of the things that played a major role in this, because what we haven't found over the last 10, 15 years is that people holding to, let's say, the understanding that men are men and women are women, they've not been putting out as many videos and TikToks and all those kind of things than those who are driving at something that's seen as a development, as progress,
as new and exciting, or whatever you want to call it.
So if you're gonna type in something about transgender, the possibility of finding something that's sticking to medical science is quite low. It's gonna take you somewhere.
I was my kids were watching the Transformers movie, and I was just typing in trans to get to Transformers movie, and the stuff that came up, I was like, this is what's scary, it's hectic.
Yeah, I think and again, we probably can step off this specific topic, but for guys like me and you, the challenge is always going to be someone who's really struggling with this for real. that they were not seeing us someone that's against them or, wants them to get hurt. It's the exact opposite.
Exactly.
Is that, you are caught up in something which is in itself a belief. It doesn't make sense. Also, you're going to be extremely hurt by all of this if you go down this road.
People are using children, I believe, to make money. And ultimately, if you follow the money, someone is making a lot of it. And it's hurting parents, children, whatever. If I can add something to your reasoning, I think the why may have a lot to do with social media. And I agree, if a child is exposed to that with no boundaries at a young age, they can just watch whatever they want for however long they want. It's very dangerous. And no parent should be allowing that. Even secular people are saying that. But I think I would like to think, maybe there's something facts against me, but I would like to think that if a child is in a healthy home environment, the chances are way less that they would go to that place, that they would even want to watch those videos. So ultimately, if we can have healthy homes with parents who love God, love their children, show them the right way, and if they have a real problem, get them real help. But affirming something that's not real is not help. And I think we need to realize that. And we need to be able to discern between the two. But, okay, we can step off because this can take the whole day. And I do want to say, just from my side as well, I do not hate or am against people that have that issue.
Yeah.
We just have to, if we can get to a place where we can say, okay, what is the common ground we can find? If we can find common ground with science even, that's already a good step in the right direction. Logical reasoning, rational thinking, that would help. But if it's a completely irrational, unreasonable, attacking spirit, then unfortunately there's no conversation to be had. But I think hopefully there's more and more of that's possible, where we can, hey, let's have a conversation. If we really care about the child's best interest, there must be other ways to do this. And I think what you said earlier is encouraging to me, that people are going, why is this happening? If we can get to the root, we can maybe see less of this going forward. Cool. But you guys are also busy with another major case at the moment, and this is about the legalization of prostitution in South Africa.
Correct.
So maybe just for those who don't know, what was and is the current law in our nation, and what are they trying to change, and why are you fighting against it?
So maybe I'll wind it back to 1988. Because in 1988,
I feel like I need to play 80s music now.
the South African Parliament at the time, we were still in the previous dispensation. They passed a law to criminalize I'm going to call it the prostituted person. Right? It's a way of talking about someone who sells themselves, or has sex for money, some reward. They criminalized that in South Africa in 1988.
Was it not criminalized before that?
No, not specifically. There were other things in our common law that would have actually prevented that or led to some consequences, among them criminal, but there wasn't a specific law in our law books. But so they added that to what was called the Morality Act or the Immorality Act. I can't remember which one. Then at the end of the 1990s, there was a case which ended up in the Constitutional Court in 2002 called State versus Jordan, where a lobby group, the acronym for it is SWET, they brought a court case with another party by a lady with the surname Jordan to ask the courts to decriminalize, prostitution again. So maybe 10 years after that initial criminalization. Then the South African Constitutional Court ruled on it and said, no, this is not unconstitutional. For the state to treat this societal issue by way of criminal prohibition is not something irrational. It's not something that infringes on the rights of those individuals. So for the state to criminalize it is in line with the Constitution.
Okay.
So then we had some other comments in that judgment, which led the South African Parliament in 2007 to add another section to the sexual offences legislation to criminalise the so-called buyer. So the person who goes and visits the prostituted person.
All right, not just the person who sells, but the person who buys. Okay.
Correct. So by 2007, we basically had full criminalisation of the commercial sex trade or the sex industry, starting from the buyer through all of the intermediaries, pimps, brothel keepers, and all the rest who, in some sense, facilitate the sexual encounter up to the person who is prostituted.
2 questions.
All of it. Yeah.
How big is the sex industry in South Africa? And 2, what does criminalizing it mean?
So I couldn't tell you the answer, but because I don't work on the ground with this, but we are, in relationship with and work together with people who both in Cape Town and in Johannesburg, who work on the ground and see the extent of this industry, so to speak, and it is large.
Sure.
Sex sells.
Yeah.
And so there's a big industry around it. Your second question was about
what does it mean to that it is criminalized? Does it mean jail time when you're caught?
It means jail time, or if it's a first or second offense, it could mean a fine initially. But the point is to encourage and incentivize, people to no longer participate in this thing.
Yes.
So that through having a criminal prohibition and criminal consequences to actually then dumb it down and reduce the size of the industry. And unfortunately, what we've seen, and I think this is not disputed between parties on either side of the debate, is that the South African public administration, through the police, but as also through the National Prosecuting Authority, they have not been implementing and enforcing the law. They've been, in the case of police, in many instances, have been abusing it. So they would arrest a prostituted person off the street and then say, "Well, do you wanna stay in jail, or do you wanna do some favor?" And then because of that, then we would let you go.
Do you have evidence of that?
Yeah, a lot. Yeah.
Wow,
I think there's
scary.
a lot of evidence of that happening.
That's so sad. Oh, my word.
Yes.
How does that help? Yeah, we've got a law, but we don't have law keepers.
Yeah.
Man.
And I think that's the major problem at the moment.
Okay.
So now with this new case starting up, I think if one was to take a very broad brush, the main argument is that, well, the law isn't enforced. And even when it's enforced, it's actually done in a corrupt way, and it's actually an abuse of power, really. And because of that, we should do away with the law.
So
that's the answer.
So the baby out with the bathwater approach.
Correct.
Sure.
And it's one of the issues that the Constitutional Court in 2002 ruled on. And they said specifically, well, you can't say that the law is bad or unconstitutional because those who have the role to implement and enforce it are not doing their job.
Yeah, hello.
That's not a rational argument.
But since that court case, has anyone tried to get the police to, up their game? But it doesn't sound like it. Like there's been a change.
No, there hasn't really been a change. I mean, that is the stuff of parliamentary records year after year after year.
This needs to change.
Yeah, when, typically not, ruling party politicians or parliamentarians, but typically from the opposition side, would be asking the tough and the necessary questions. Are you doing your job? Why every year, year after year, when the crime stats come out, we're doing worse and worse? Shouldn't the level of sexual offences be reducing in the country? Why aren't we seeing more successful prosecutions leading to sentences and jail time and all of those kind of things? So the questions have been asked, but unfortunately, and this is maybe a broader point and maybe not even for today, we have a broken state.
Yes.
Completely dysfunctional, still holding on to, the belief that if you give more and more power and functions to the state, that is the best answer for society as a whole. Let the state be the custodian, basically the executor, the manager, of society on behalf of the people. In the case of South Africa, we don't have a track record over the last 30 years where we can say this state or this government deserves more work and more functions, to be given to them. It's a different story if you go to places like Sweden, the Nordic countries, where they have a kind of a socialist system in place, where government fulfills a lot of societal functions. And people in the, let's say, private spaces, they are willing to give more functions to the state, cleaning up pavements, whatever it is, because the state has proven itself able to do the job.
They actually do it.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
But that's not where we are.
Imagine the hundreds of billions of rands have been used to actually uplift our nation. We have so much potential.
Absolutely.
It can be so much better.
Yeah.
Sure.
South Africa is that kind of story that, we are here despite everything.
We are
that's
going
broken.
despite. Yeah, absolutely. Sure. Just back to the topic.
Yeah.
In your experience going through this case, being in this case, is there an intersection between the human trafficking industry and the prostitution industry in our nation? And as part of the push to legalize prostitution, do you think it has to do with somehow getting away with more of the human trafficking side? I mean, this is more speculation, I know, but just your sense about that.
I would also have to speculate, but what we do know and what we have seen from research around the globe is that nations where prostitution is legalized, they become more, let's say, used jurisdictions for human trafficking purposes.
Because you can get away with stuff
because
more.
That the people who are, let's say, providing or facilitating, they know that a certain part of what they're doing won't be criminalized.
Yeah.
And so then those jurisdictions actually become hotspots for trafficking purposes. And that is a matter of research. That's not a matter of speculation.
Okay.
But so that is one of the dangers, is that, if we go down this route, what will it mean? The reason why we got involved, or trying to get involved, because we've applied to court now to become involved, is because the South African government have decided they are not going to oppose this attack on South Africa's legislation.
That's hectic.
It's absolutely, to me, it's unheard of that government, who's sort of the implementer of laws that Parliament make, would say, Parliament, you made this law, but we're not going to implement it. And when it's attacked, we're not going to defend it.
That actually says a lot.
It does.
Without saying anything.
Yeah,
that's scary.
That represents a kind of a policy decision.
Yeah, it does.
And it's actually...
It's almost like tacitly, letting something happen that maybe you didn't even want to let happen in the first place.
And I mean, if you can't do the job, if you can't implement, in other words, you're not able to do it.
Or willing.
Yeah. So it could be both.
It sounds like a willing thing.
It could be both.
Yeah.
But what we've seen from the state's papers is that although they're in agreement that it should be decriminalized, they actually want the industry to be regulated. In other words, they want to try and put in place safeguards so that typically women, the prostituted persons, won't experience all of the bad consequences that come with.
Is that a realistic expectation?
That is very delusional.
Yeah.
Because if you look at what's going on in the rest of the world, you can't
That's not
do
what
that.
happens. Yeah.
You can't do that.
So they basically want prostitutes to pay tax.
So that's I think part of the argument that they're making is if we regulate this, what we can do is we can then, through taxes, on this industry, force them to pay for the regulation cost. There will be a cost to regulating all of this.
Okay.
And, if we can get taxes from all of that, that will pay for the regulation.
If they can't even apply the current law, how will they regulate a new system? If they can't regulate our normal systems, I mean, the only system that seems to work in our country is SARS. The rest, not so much. Yeah. So, there can't be any belief that that's really a realistic expectation. Yeah. Okay, so you guys are, I read your letter about why you are doing this, and there was a part that was so beautifully put, where I can't remember the exact words, but you were writing about the human dignity of each person.
Yes.
And how no person should be sold or bought or used like a commodity.
Correct.
That for me really stood out.
That's right.
Because some people who are in that industry probably don't want to be there, probably are forced to be there. The one or two that might want to be there don't even know how damaged that is, that they are cheapening themselves, they are selling their bodies for profit. The degeneration, it's just horrific. But just in your own words, maybe explain to us the why for you and on that level. Just the human, I love my fellow human beings level.
Yeah. So it's very clear that what prostitution is, and this has actually been also confirmed by the Constitutional Court, when they considered this issue the first time in 2002, is that in its nature, prostitution is the commodification of the human body.
Yes.
Right? And the court then says, which we agree with, is that the respect that the South African Constitution regards as being inherent in the human body does not allow for people to be used as objects or products, for other purposes.
Yeah, that makes sense. That it's a human right to not do that or have that done to you.
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Wow.
So that is, I think, at the core of our approach.
And that's actually a legal argument.
That is a legal argument.
It is based on a moral framework, but it's a legal argument for human rights and dignity.
Yeah. And what was really nice when the court considered this issue in 2002, there was also an attack from the those who were attacking the legislation at the time to say that, to have something like this is actually the expression of the morality of a very specific group within the country, which are Christians. Okay, it's only 85% of the country, right? So we can't
only 85.
We can't go with that. That would be wrong.
Oh my word!
But the court then says, well, no, the South African state actually has a mandate to implement laws that are moral.
Yes.
That's
awesome.
You can't implement laws that are immoral if you know that they are immoral. But they also then said, well, the morality that the state must promote and respect must be grown out of the Constitution itself. So the Bill of Rights, in that sense, in the view of our Constitutional Court, presents some kind of objective, normative value system.
Okay. Some kind of morality.
Some kind of morality. It's a public morality. It's not a personal.
It's a secular morality. Yeah.
It's a kind of secular morality.
But at least it's something.
Correct.
Yeah.
And if you can show, which the state was able to show 20 years ago in that case, that to criminalize sex for payment outside of marriage, that is in line with public morality as expressed in the Constitution, then that's fine. And so the court said, well, this is fine. Yes, it agrees with Christian morality, but it also agrees with public morality as we find it in the Constitution, in the Bill of Rights. I think that is quite helpful because we've been dancing around this issue now for 30 years, which is, can specific groups and their views actually be consistent with the Constitution itself? And if they can, then we should say, well, you're doing well. You're not against what the Constitution wants for this nation.
Yeah.
You're actually promoting alongside. And I think if we're really honest about it, the Constitution itself is only a document, right? Whatever morality there could be found in it, has to have some kind of underlying source, which is drawn out by some people at the top who looks at the text and say, well, I see in these words the following things. But their ideas, all of our ideas, must come from somewhere. It's not like, you have these
just floating around
original thoughts, that are there.
That's the problem with text, It's what was the original spirit that something was written in. 20, 30 years later, you read the same text with your new worldview and your different ideology, and you now read into that something that was never meant. And that's the problem with legislation. It's a problem with our constitution, because we do have a liberal constitution.
Correct.
But it's been made even more liberal. and damagingly so, because of people reading stuff into it to feed their agendas. And that's an ongoing challenge. And therefore, I'm glad for people like you guys who are standing up against stuff like that when it happens, because I think the Constitution in its original form should be defended, and a more conservative view should be always pushed in there, because when it was formed, it was done from a way more let's even say centralist view politically and morally than it is now, and I think that's important. So please keep going, do what you're doing. I think it's super important. And you can plug your organization for a moment. How can people help you and support you at Cause for Justice?
Yeah. So obviously these cases, the reality is that for legal practitioners to be involved and spend time on court cases means that they can't be doing other work. And so it helps us if people support financially, of course, if they want to join the cause in that way.
Just tell people who have no idea.
Yes.
What does a court case cost? Or on average, time-wise, if you have to link because it is way more than I think most people realize.
Yeah, look, the kind of cases we're involved in, because there's often, disputes of facts involved, and you can't just go in with, let's say, one attorney and one advocate. The kind of matters requires that you actually have a team. And so I would say, if it's something that can be disposed of in a short space of time, I'm saying within the space of a year, where you might have, a couple of
a year is a short space. Wow,
very, very
hectic.
short.
Yeah.
I would say you're probably looking at about 500,000 rand to $1 million just to have a team work on a case sporadically, and then at the end of it there would be a hearing. But typically these matters are more in the ballpark of 3 to 5 million rand in terms of
time spent,
the fees of the legal practitioners working on the cases, and then we're looking at more at 2 to 4 years. The time that it takes for these things to run out. There is usually an appeal involved. Very rarely that a constitutional matter is not appealed, especially when legislation is attacked, because all cases where legislation is found to be unconstitutional at high court level has to be confirmed by the constitutional court for it to have effect.
What a mission.
Yeah, so you can't, like this prostitution matter, you can't start on this journey without the constitutional court getting involved at some point.
All right, because it's a constitutional matter.
Yeah, unless the court of first instance, the first high court that finds on it that says this is not unconstitutional. In other words, the legislation must stand. And the applicants who brought the case decide that they're willing to accept it.
Okay.
But that also very rarely happens. But yeah, so that's one of the ways, probably one of the main ways to support it. I would also say is that, we, every now and again, we do put out, let's say, content that helps people to understand, how does one think about this, from a philosophical point of view, from a legal point of view, even from a Christian theological point of view. So the second thing I've seen is get your own thinking straight about it.
That's good.
Because we are so affected by what I would call an imbalance between compassion and truth. Is that we're willing to say that, in order for this person not to feel bad about themselves, we can't tell them the truth because that'll hurt too much, right? But in the process, all we're doing is we're heaping up the hurt for later. We're just postponing the hurt, and we're actually making the hurt worse, right? That's what we're doing. And then when you sort of get your thinking straight, at some point, it's also good to start speaking with other people about it, even if it's just in your own living room. When you have friends over, speak about it. See what other people think, and then of course, if you have platforms like yourself, is that at some point, these are the real things that are happening in our country, which is pushing our nation in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And if you can add your voice or amplify some other voices, then do that. So whatever is in your hand to do that. Work with it.
I'd love to hear from you your organization is called Cause for Justice.
Yeah.
Many people don't feel like our legal system is just.
Yeah.
And the way that it operates is not, for example, the law that hasn't been implemented. That's just one example. So, I mean, in a way, you are fighting for justice in what seems many times to be an unjust, field.
Yeah.
What is your definition of justice? The justice that you are fighting for?
Yeah. So there could be many, let's say, components to it, but I think the main thing about justice is for people, for someone to actually get the rewards for their actions. So one of the things we're struggling with a lot in this, let's say, social imaginary, this societal thought, let's say, stage that we are in, is that it would be wrong, for people to have bad consequences. Except the only way to take human dignity seriously is if someone does badly, for them to have the bad consequences that go with that.
That's
right?
such a good point. Sure.
Or if someone does well, to reward them for that.
Yeah.
So if we look at a societal level, I think Romans 13, 1-7, where Paul speaks about what is the role of the governing authorities. He says, well, it's actually the governing authorities are God's servant for your good. And if you are fearful of them, the way to not be worried or whatever about it is do good, and they will reward you or they will approve of it. But if you do badly, if you do wrong, then there will be consequences. And then the word says, because they don't bear the sword in vain. God has given them a sword to effect justice in that sense. And I think we've seen a lot of the lack of justice is that people don't get swift rewards, both, when they do
Good
bad,
and bad, yeah.
and when they do good. And, the worst kind of scenario is when we get to, I think it's either in Jeremiah or Isaiah maybe, when it speaks about, people calling good evil
and evil good. That's where we are.
And we see so much of that.
Yeah. And a big part of that is, if you believe or do certain things that should have consequences that will put you into line, and those consequences are removed. And I think, I think what you're saying is so true and so powerful. Justice is that people should get what they deserve. I think that's brilliant.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that goes back to parenting, because I think what we've seen in the last 2 to 3 decades of parenting is this affirming approach and taking away discipline, taking away consequences. Correct. And just sort of, bubble wrapping our children and letting them do what they want to do and calling them our friends and all that kind of stuff. And I hear it's gentle parenting is the term now. And I think if you have that approach, you shouldn't be surprised with the consequence once again. Absolutely. I think taking responsibility is so important, and learning to do that. And I think we've lost that, in a big way. I mean, even when law enforcement is not doing law enforcement, there should be consequences for that. Yeah. And so that they know, hey, I need to stay in line. Because most people don't have a proper moral compass in themselves. They need someone to, in a healthy way, police them to stay on the right path. And eventually they will grow, mature in that, and then they will be able to lead others. But initially we all need that. We need a bit of a clap on the side to keep you on the right path. Yeah. Sure.
I think I just want to link that back to the justice of God, right? Because someone might say, well, is that right though? Because God doesn't give everyone their just reward of going to hell. But in fact, He made provision for that, because someone did pay the price for our wrongdoing, for our evil. He did put someone on a cross. He did exact His judgment on sin. That did happen, right? And so that makes, salvation all the more, beautiful and, grave in the sense of the weight of it, the glory of it, that God would do that. He didn't cut a corner and say, well, I'm going to put my justice aside because I want to save humanity. He said, well, I can save humanity, but I can't not be just.
Yeah. His mercy, which is not giving you what you do deserve, is that Jesus did what needed to be done for justice to be served.
He got what we deserve.
He got what we deserved, yeah. That's a good way of saying it.
Yeah.
And I mean, just a slight adjustment on that I would make is, and this is because people believe this, God doesn't send people to hell.
Yeah.
We are all destined for hell because of sin in the world and the way that we were, because of the fall of man. We are all destined for hell.
Yeah.
He has given us a way to not have to go.
Yeah.
And that's his son, Jesus Christ.
Correct.
And that's, if you don't believe me, just read John 3. It makes it very clear that those who accept him, they will be with him. Those who reject him, they are condemned already.
Yeah.
He didn't come to condemn.
No.
If we don't accept him, we're already condemned. So that's just powerful. But that to me is pivotal about this conversation today, is what is justice. I think that's important for us to talk about. And let's have that. Let's have those conversations with our friends. What do you think is justice? And what would a just society look like? And let's all of us be more like David and say, man, there's a cause that I need to actually get my skin in the game and give it a bash. It's so necessary. And you might be surprised at the Goliaths that fall when you're willing to do that.
Yeah.
So one last thing before we say goodbye.
Yeah.
I would love to you to tell us also about the Wilberforce Academy, what that is, what you guys do. I've been to one of your conferences and half of a second one, and you do powerful work. It's linked up to an organization in the UK.
Yes.
Please tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so the Wilberforce Academy is a training program in the practical application of a biblical worldview. So that's about, how do we think biblically about the things that are happening in society, looking at the typical things that would impact on God's pattern as we find it in Genesis 1 and 2.
Sure.
And then the question is, okay, well, now you're thinking straight, but can you actually effectively live that out in the world that we find ourselves in today?
Because different spheres of life, yeah.
Correct, yeah. So you might be in business, you might be in the media industry, you might be in law or education, whatever it is. So we also, in our programs, we break out into those, we call it vocational spheres, where people can sit with people who have walked a road with God and have been found faithful and fruitful in those areas of work, and to ask the questions, okay, well, if this is how God made the world, if this is his pattern for life, and this is what has been happening in the world and the reasons why it's been happening, what is my role in it? What is God calling me to do? And the thing that we always say is that we are called to be faithful witnesses to Christ in public life. It's not a case of you get your ticket to heaven and then you keep your head down and make as much money as you can.
Yeah, hope for better days
until you get there.
Sure.
That is not the call. The call is to go out and make other ones, make disciples who believe and think and do as you do, and that's all about fruitfulness. So being faithful and bearing fruit, and fruit that remain. And the most important fruit that remain are those disciples that we make. So our children, and I was blessed. This is just a little bit of a segue. Is that at the beginning of this year, our daughter, who's still 6, but she turned 7 this year, she was baptized, and my wife and I,
that's awesome.
We got to baptize her, and even though she came to Christ in May of last year already, we just thought at the time she might still be a little bit young to know exactly what it is that she's saying yes to, and giving herself to God for. But so the Lord, have been journeying with us, with her on the discipleship journey, and that was such a major, major milestone for her, but also for us as a family, and just a lot of gratefulness, to God for saving the next generation, raising up the next generation. And I think that's a lot about the call and the purpose of the Wilberforce Academy is for people to, in their spheres, to be both bold but also effective witnesses to the Lord Jesus and his ways, which are not only good for Christians, his ways are good and the best for everyone in society.
Universal application of his ways work.
Correct. And if we believe that, why would we withhold that? Why would we not shout it from the rooftops? Because it's so good. But obviously, the times we live in is that Christianity is looked down on. It's seen as judgmental by many people. In South Africa, we carry a lot of baggage, unfortunately, still from apartheid, and it's very easy for people who are, opposed to the lordship of Christ and his ways to just refer back to colonialism, apartheid,
look what happened,
patriarchy, all those things, and that's sort of the end of the argument. But we don't get to ask the question, well, was that a true expression of, let's say, Christian nationalism, or was that actually Christianity being abused for ulterior political purposes? And so I don't think that we have enough discussions about what really went on in apartheid. It's quite easy to just, flog the horse and, shift the blame. But there's more to it than that. I'm not trying to say that apartheid was good in any way. I'm just saying that the fact that people criticize Christianity because of the apartheid system being built on Christian nationalism, I'm saying that's not a fair criticism.
Agreed. It's like, saying that the Crusades was a great idea and that's a brush you can brush on each Christian. It's not the case. It was an abuse of the core message.
Correct.
It was a misunderstanding and abuse of. And because that's not Christ's heart, that's not his mission. So I agree with you. That's something that, it's a big hurdle to get over. But I believe we can if we keep having good discussions. I think something we need to learn to do in the day and age we are in is to really listen to people that don't believe the same as we do. But hopefully that they will also listen to us and that we can find some way of coexisting in a loving way. But what I love about the Wilberforce Academy is that you are training the practical side of that. What does that look like? And what I'm hearing is salt and light. How to be salt and light in this world. And I can encourage anyone that is especially the young leaders in our nation, that you should go to the Wilberforce Academy. Just quickly tell us, when does that happen normally, and how can people sign up for that?
So the program runs on a kind of an annual basis. We have our intensive structured residential week in January. It's usually about 2 weeks before the university term starts. So the school would have started, but university's not started. We do focus on students and on young working people as a focus group. So that's at the end of January. It's a 5 to 6 day program, runs from a Sunday afternoon until a Friday afternoon. And then that is followed up by quarterly engagements, what we call refocus days. So we bring people back together, and then we delve a little bit more into how do we actually do this. And we look at specific practical things. For example, now in May, on the 17th of May, we have a refocus day where we're looking at land expropriation. And, is there a place for it in God's purposes, or is it all about, stopping certain people from taking my things or getting back what people stole from me? There's all of these kind of narratives involved. But are we asking the right question? Is that what is God's purposes with land in the lives of people? Which should be the starting point. Because I think the main issue with land is that people idolize it in some way. It's either used as a way, as a security, or as a way to hoard and become rich, or from the other side, I would say, it's just this focus on lack and I don't have, and that kind of relationship.
Or it's been taken from me, and it's not necessarily even the case. But there's ideological things that come in there. There's historical things. It's such a tricky space.
Very.
Who was here first, and does that matter? There's all these arguments. It's a really interesting time we live in. And there's all these things happening. I mean, that's a whole other discussion. Maybe you should come back and we can have a land discussion. But thank you for what you've shared today. It's really powerful. It really encouraged me, and I'm excited that there are people like you out there doing what you're doing. So thank you for coming in today. And is there any last thoughts that you'd like to share with the listeners? Just maybe some words about being bold, being courageous, standing up for justice.
Yeah. So the organization that we partner with from the UK, it's called Christian Concern, and we've been walking a road with them since more or less our inception, although they weren't involved in our inception. But over the last 10 years or so, we've grown closer with them, and the leader of that organization is a barrister in the UK, a lady by the name of Andrea Williams. And
she is a force of nature.
Absolutely. No, the Lord has called her, and she's taken it seriously.
Yeah.
But she always says, that if we want to understand what winning is about, because we all want to win in one way or another, that she would say standing is winning. So if you're at a place where you're under attack, if you can keep standing, you're doing well. Or if you're at a place where there's an opportunity to move the line, stand firm and take the ground that God is is giving.
I like that.
And again, the heart is not in that sense to get one over someone else, or having your way kind of thing. That's all about being faithful to the Lord Jesus. And if we take it seriously that He is Lord of all, in that all authority has been given to Him in heaven and on earth, then what we would do is that we would actually live that reality now. I will close with this, is that I say it quite often in especially the last couple of months or so, that the only difference between where we are now and when Jesus comes again is that in the time we're living now, we have a choice to serve and surrender and submit to Him. Once He comes back, the choice is there no more.
Wow.
But the fact that He is Lord of all already, that doesn't change. That is already the case. We have a choice now whether we will submit or not. Once he comes back, that is settled for everyone. You won't have a choice anymore about it. So
that's a good reality check. Thank you for that. Well, Ryan, thanks for being salt and light. Thanks for doing what you're doing. Thanks for fighting for true justice, biblical justice. May you, your family, be blessed, and your business and your cause and Wilberforce, everything that you are involved with, may it just go from strength to strength and glory to glory. And everyone listening, please support them any way you can, and go to the Wilberforce Academy. It's really cool. Yeah. I've been there. I've met some great people. I've heard some things that have changed my life. Yeah. So it's really awesome. And thanks for coming in today. I hope I can have you back someday soon, and we can continue our conversation. But God bless you.
Thank you, Heinz. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Awesome.
Thanks.